Hi, this is Dr. Jabali, and in this video we're going to focus on topic 9.1, looking at past IB exam papers, questions that are short and long related to things that has to do with transpiration and xylem. So when you're going to start the question, always look first for the first word, which is the command word. So in this case, it's describe. When it says describe, you can do drawings and words into it. Okay, the second thing you need to look for is whatever the numbers that comes right after the question. So if the questions, if the numbers are like 1 to 2, doesn't mean that you go general. That means go very direct to the point, but very specific. And if it's like 6 to 9, these means you go from all the general information to the most detailed, specific information. So that already said, let's go ahead and start working on the questions of 9.1. So these two questions, I picked them because these are common questions that come out, and they come from different IB papers, but they're both asking about the same thing, was using different words. And just to show you here, I'm going to show you how sometimes IB does not always ask exactly the same way of question, but it's still asking the same thing. So here it says, describe the processes that cause water to move from the roots of the plants to their leaves. Here it says, explain how water is carried by transpiration stream. These are asking exactly the same thing. They're talking about basically the water going from here, the water starting from the root, and then from the root it will go up through the stem, and from the stem it go up to the leaf. So in this process, what is this process going from this direction going up like this? This process right here is transpiration. So you can see here that both questions are asking about the same thing. Here, you give away the word transpiration, while in the first one it did not. But when it said roots to leaves, you obviously are knowing that it's talking about transpiration because it says water and water. So this process, they want you to describe everything that's happening in the roots, everything that's happening in the stem, and then everything that happens to the leaf. So with the water and the roots, you can always talk about how minerals are coming in, and that leads to the osmosis of the water coming in because water wants to go to a place of high solutes. You can also talk about how minerals are coming in through active transport, as well as through the hyphae of the fungus. And when you have too many minerals inside the root, then you have water coming in through osmosis. After the water enters the root, you can talk about the symplastic and the apoplastic. What are these? This is the way the water moves inside the root, not get inside, but going through the root. Symplastic is going through the cytoplasm, while apoplastic is going through the cell membrane, eventually gets to the xylem. So once it gets to the xylem, then the next thing is talk about the stem. In the stem, we can talk about the capillary action, right? Which that means you talk about the adhesion and the cohesion, and make sure to talk, when you talk about these two, you talk about the hydrogen bond that they do and talk about their definition. Adhesion is water with other walls. Cohesion is water with water. And this way, it causes the pull of the water up through capillary action. Once you get to the leaf, you can talk about the stomata. You can talk about the guard cells, how the guard cells controls the opening of the stomata. And the guard cells, if you want, you can talk about how guard cells open and close by talking about the potassium and the water. And you can talk about how the water will evaporate through the leaves, which this is known as transpiration. So there's much more information I can talk here. Like I can talk about the spongy mesophyll, and I can talk about the abscisic acid hormone that controls the guard cells. But this can see that it already talks a lot of information. So let's look at the mark scheme here for both. You know that they're both asking the same question, but this does not always mean that the mark schemes will be exactly the same. Sometimes one sentence can be found one and will not be found in the other one. So looking at the first one on the left side, water moved transported by the xylem vessels. Let's see if you hear, does it say anything about, it only says here, the maximum we can think about here, it's saying the flow of water through the xylem, right? Now, the next question says transported under the tension, suction, pull up. So does it say anything about transport to the suction up one? Let's see. No, pull it up by creates. Yes, it does. Rather pull it out of the design through suction of low pressure tension, transpiration pulls results. So it does have it both. Transpiration, loss of water, generates pulling forces of low pressure tensions, which is basically this. So they have it both there. It says loss of water, so it's right here. Now, tension pool generated from evaporation from the cell walls of the mesophyll. So evaporation of the spongy mesophyll, it's right here. Transpiration is loss of water vapor from the leaf of the stomata. So it goes from the roots. The leaf is transpiration stream, so you can say that. Do we have any other places that says how evaporation is coming out? Nope. Then we have cohesive. A cohesion is water due to hydrogen bonding. And I told you, when you talk about cohesive, talk about hydrogen bonding and how it attracts water to water. And let's see if they have the cohesion talking on this section. Yes, water molecules stick to each other is cohesive due to hydrogen bonding, like I told you. Cohesion, so chain column water molecules doesn't break, it remains continuous. And does this one have it here? Creates continuous column transpiration stream. Well, it does mention indirectly in the last one here. And transpiration stream is a column of flow of water from xylem from the root's leaf, which basically goes up to the one on the top here. Now, it says, do not award marks for absorption of water by the roots. So they're not asking for the formation that's going through the roots. This is just from the roots to the leaves. Okay. So in this case, you can see there's some extra things that are not found on the first mark scheme, but it's found on the second one, which replaced it by osmosis. It did not mention any osmosis on the first one. Diffusion of water vapor through the stomata. It did not mention anything about stomata. Water loss replaced by the xylem. Clear diagram showing the movement of water from the xylem through the cell walls of the airspace. Xylem vessels are thin, hollow tubes. It doesn't even describe xylem in the first one. Adhesion, which is not mentioned on the first one, between the water xylem due to the polarity of water molecules. So what you see here is green is what they have in common, and yellow is what they don't have, but they both are asking for the same thing, the water moving through the roots to the leaves through transpiration. So what you do now is pause this video and combine the green formation as one and then add the yellow ones to the process. See, here I did mention a lot more information that happens, but here is just going straight to the point. We're talking about what is transpiration. It's basically going from the roots to the leaf. It's this pull that is going on because of the evaporation that is happening in the leaf. We also talk about how osmosis is always replacing the water in the xylem. We also talk about cohesion and the hydrogen bond, which causes the water to keep pulling continuously up. We also talk about the adhesion, which is the water attracting to the xylem walls and makes it go up. We also can talk about the stomata, the opening and releasing the water through the leaves as evaporation. So this right here is just showing, once again, how two questions are talking about the same thing, but not always necessarily the mark scheme is the same. So please go ahead, pause this video and combine this. This is a way for you to practice writing a long essay when it comes to transpiration. Now the question says here, outline the adaptations of the plant roots for absorption of minerals in the soil and describe the process of mineral ions uptakes in the roots. So you can see they're both mentioned about mineral ions, and it's talking about into the roots, and this is from the soil, but it's still mentioning about minerals getting in there. Now I already mentioned about that, as if you can see, this is just basically showing, for example, here we have the root, right? And let's say minerals can be potassium, calcium, magnesium. So basically they go inside and they do this through the active transport. That's one way. And once they go in, you pile up all these potassium or minerals inside. So what are you doing? You're creating a high concentration of solute inside the root. Now, of course, this will cause what? Will cause the water that is outside on the soil to be attracted to going inside, and it goes by osmosis. Another way that you can get the minerals inside the root, which is active transport, is another one is called the fungus, right? Hyphae. Now, hyphae is like a root hairs that is extended from the fungus, and this increases the surface area, so that means increases more absorption that is happening. And another way is some of these minerals right here, they can be dissolved on water, and with water it just diffuse into the root. So these are different ways in which minerals can get into the root. So let's look at the mark scheme. Remember, those two questions are asking the same thing. Let's see how much in common they have, these two mark schemes. So mineral ions absorbed by active transport. Do we have here anything? Yes, says uses active transport. Large surface area. Of course, when you talk about large surface area, we're talking about branching and the root hairs. Do we have here absorbed by the root hairs? Increases surface area of the absorptions. So when we talk about root hairs, it's just like the hyphae. Root hair cells have carrier proteins or ion pumps. Uses proteins, pumps to move ions because, again, pumps are active transports. Obviously, they will need mitochondria for ATP, but it doesn't say here in the bottom about mitochondria. To provide ATP for active transport, so it uses ATP. Connections with the fungi. So like I told you, the fungal hyphae, does it say anything about fungal hyphae here? Nope. So these are the only things they have that are common between the two of them. And then you have the additional things. So for example, in this one, you can say it has mitochondria in the root hairs because mitochondria gives the ATP. So those pumps, those active transports are bringing the mineral inside. And the more root hairs you have, the more surface area you have. So that means you're more absorbing it. And that means you have here like the fungal hyphae. Now, what you don't have on the other one is against concentration gradient, diffusion into the cells. Of course, sometimes you already have enough inside, so active transport is always going from a low to a high, so you're going against the gradient. Can the cell wall space be drawn through the cell walls of a plastic pathway? Selective, only specific ions can be absorbed. So you never could imagine the greens and probably the blues maybe, but not the greens. So here you're kind of getting extra information to make a very strong mark scheme. So once again, pause this video, connect the yellow first, and then add the blues and the greens. And this way you have the strongest mark scheme. So every time it talks about mineral being absorbed, you have a very strong mark scheme that you can use for any other question related to minerals absorptions in the roots. So the next question here, it is in hot, dry condition, plants lose water rapidly due to transpiration. Now, it says explain, that's the command word, how the structures of the process of plant allow this water to be replaced. So once again, we are talking about transpiration, but this now is asking for the structures too. So when we talk about the structures, we can talk about the plant. For example, this is talking about the conditions plant lose water rapidly to transpiration. We can talk about this plant stomata. We can talk about the xylem structure. We can talk about the xylem having the lignin, which can deal with the pressure of the water going up. We can talk about the guard cells, which we already talked about how the guard cells are controlling the stomata. We can talk about adhesion and cohesion and how these two, which are properties of water and having hydrogen bond, they can cause the capillary action, which it moves up the stem. So these are the most things you can talk about about the plant. So basically also we can talk about the transpiration pool. What does that mean? That means every time water evaporates, it causes a pull inside the plant to keep pushing the water upwards. And this way you also end up absorbing water, right? From where? From the soil. So every time water leaves from a leaf, more water is being absorbed from the soil to keep up and replacing that water as water moves through osmosis. So let's see what we have here. We have evaporation of water, creates tension, low pressure, negative pressure, pulling force. So remember, if you say the water evaporation causes a transpiration pull, you kind of already does again. So you say evaporation of water creates transpirational pull. Then it's good. Water drawn through the cell walls out of the xylem by capillary action. So you can see I did talk about capillary action, adhesion, low pressure, tension, suction, pulling force in the xylem. So again, I did mention there's a low pressure in the xylem, which is the pulling force. Hydrogen makes water cohesive, allow water to be pulled up the tension. So remember, the cohesion keeps the waters together with each other. So when they pull together. Xylem resists tension, low pressure, collapse with thickening. So I didn't mention about the xylem having the lignin walls in order to stand all that pressure. Water travels from the roots to the leaves through the xylem. Obviously, I mentioned the structure right here. Yeah, it has to be everything through the xylem because it does not say anywhere in the question about xylem. And then Water is absorbed by the root through osmosis. Active transport of ion solutes into the roots, enabling osmosis. Deep, wide-ranging, extensive root systems. That means we're talking about the structures of the root. So you can see here, this part was mentioned about the root. And so far, this was mentioned, basically most of this here, I would say up to here, these guys are talking about the xylem, what's happening. And this is just generally saying how there is the evaporation happening and the transpiration pool is happening going in. Thick wax coating reduces transpiration of loss. Now, how would you think about this? But it's a structure, right? The cuticle tries to prevent transpiration. We don't want to say a lot of transpiration. It can also be about losing the transpiration. So this is also another structure. Small, no leaves reduce surface area of the leaf. So that means if you're reducing the leaf surface area, you're reducing transpiration, right? So like thorns instead of leaves. And a few stomata, that means the pills are rolled. And then we have hairs on the leaf surface to reduce their flow. So you can see that all of these stomata open at night. These are all about the structures. So once again, now we have a full mark scheme here. And I want to go through it again so we can get a little bit of grasp what exactly this match with the answer question here. So first, let's talk about the whole process of transpiration. So it's evaporation of water that creates a transport pool. Where is this happening? This is happening basically in the xylem, right? And how does it do this? It's by capillary action of adhesion going on. So it's a low pressure tension sucking or pulling through the force of the xylem. Then from this, I can talk about the hydrogen bonds of the cohesive who allows the water to be pulled up by the tension. Then here I'm talking about the xylem again. It resists tension by having lignified walls. And then water travels from the roots, the leaves, the xylem. And then here starts everything about the roots. Water is being absorbed by the roots as by osmosis, but that can happen because active transport puts the minerals in there, and this causes the osmosis to happen. Then, since I'm talking about the structure, right, because I want to know about structure, then I can talk about the structure of root, how it's increasing the water absorptions. So deep, wide, extensive root systems such as root hairs. And then I can talk about, since I was talking about transpiration, why not talk about what's happening in the leaf? So you have the wax cuticles that reduces transpiration. We talk about some leaves being very small, or they are like thorns instead of to reduce, or having less stomata in the leaves, or having hair on the leaves, which allows to reduce the airflow. So that means it doesn't allow the air to pass and take away the water. And then talk about the stomatas being open just during the night to reduce the water loss. So from this process, since we're talking about structure in the process of water, this whole part here, we were talking about the structure of the leaf. And it's not always about making transpiration increase, but it can also be about reducing transpiration. So cuticle stops it, smaller leaves, less stomatas, more hair, or open the stomatas during night. All of this is manipulating the process of water. Here, then, of course, we talk about the root. We talk about water can only enter through osmosis, but for the water to enter, you have to get the minerals inside by active transport. So you have a high concentration of solute in the root. The water will go in. Also, roots have to have a lot of root hairs, which extend throughout the soil to get more water. Then you have this area here, which most of this is about the stem, or could I say about the xylem itself, and talk about how you have the cohesion, adhesion through capillary actions and their hydrogen bonds pulling the water up. And every time you pull the water up, some of the water evaporates, which causes this pull suction of wanting to replace the water that has been gone. So this is talking about the structure. At the same time, it's talking how the water is going from the roots all the way to the stem and eventually to the leaves. So this is a perfect one, not just talking about how the water is moving, but also the structure, such as the structure of the xylem, the structure of the root, and the structure of the leaf. So this is a great one to answer when it comes not only about the process, but the structure. If there was no structure here, I probably would not be talking about half of this. I would even be talking about this. And probably I wouldn't be talking so much about the cohesive, adhesive hydrogen bond, but still. Or here, the lignin. But because it's that structure, I definitely talk about a little bit more about the xylem. as well as I did talk about more about the hair roots, and eventually all of this about the leaf. So the next question here says, explain how abiotic factors affect the rate of transpiration in the terrestrial plants. So rate of transpiration means how fast you can evaporate water, right? And abiotic factors basically something on the atmosphere that causes it to evaporate. So we can talk about temperature, we can talk about wind, we can talk about humidity, and we can even talk about sunlight sometimes. And what else we can talk about here? Let's see, wind, temperature, humidity. We can even talk about other factors, for example, as in, for instance, the amount of stomata under the leaf. But these are the main things that I can think of. So, for example, temperature, if you increase temperature, obviously you increase transpiration, but it will be only to a certain point, because after this, the plant will die, right? The wind, there's more wind, obviously there's going to be more transpiration because you're kind of getting the water out of the way. So that means there's a negative pressure, which means more water wants to come out. Humidity is the only one that, if you increase the humidity, it's the only one that decreases the transpiration, because that means there's so much water outside of the plant. There's so much water in the air that it's a high concentration on the outside. So the outside has a high concentration compared to the inside. So obviously water is not going to go from a low to a high. Now, sunlight, of course, this can cause eventually indirectly to increase the temperature, and that means there'll be more transpiration. But when it gets too much sunlight, can cause too hot, and then this goes back to the temperature here. So let's see. Less transpiration as humidity rise. Makes sense. Small concentration gradient of water vapor. And when they say here small concentration gradient of water vapor, basically they were saying here, if you have humidity on the outside, that means there's a high concentration, and the small concentration they'll talk about inside. So because you have a low amount of water and high amount there, there's no chances that the water will leave the plant. More transpiration as the temperature rises. Water, faster diffusion, more kinetic energy. That means when you increase temperature, the water molecules are moving more faster, so it's more chances of it going out. Fast evaporation, as you can see. More transpiration as the wind increases. Humid hair, water vapor blown away from the leaf. Exactly. So if you're getting all that water droplets on the leaf out of the way, that means you have more space for more water to leave. Increase the concentration gradient of the water vapor, which again, if you have here a bunch of water and you have water here, and then suddenly the wind comes and blows away this, what does this make? This makes the inside become high compared to the outside, which is low, and voila, more water will come out. That's why it says increasing concentration gradient. And more transpiration in the light, due to light causing stomata to open. Of course, more stomata open, more things will come out. A wider opening of brighter lights, hence more transpiration. So again, more sunlight, more stomata, more they're open, the more water come out. And here we have the camp plants are the opposite. The camp, what they do during the night, they open, during the day, they close. Narrow stomata, high carbon dioxide concentration, hence less transpiration. So this just means that in camp plants, they have a narrow stomata, which that means they usually do not have much transpiration happening. They have mostly is in high concentration of carbon dioxide. So in this process, what do we see? We have here that humidity, we talked about humidity, we talk about the temperature, we talk about the wind, we talk about the light, and we even talk about, in this case, the camp plants. So these are different things that you can talk about when it comes to transpiration. So now, explain here how wind affects the rate of transpiration in the leaf. So this is coming back to this one, which obviously we are talking about here. The more transpiration with the wind, and that means there's humid air blown away from the leaf, increasing the concentration gradient of the vapor. What does that mean? Basically, think of the drawing here. Imagine you have a plant, and if you have here the same amount of water inside and outside of the plant, right? Same amount of water. But then a wind comes in and blows these water away from the plant. This will cause what? It will cause the inside to have a high concentration compared to the low. And we know that water moves from high to low, so the water will do what? The water will evaporate. So this is basically means that the more wind, more transpiration. Simply because the wind is taking away the water vapor surrounding the plant and allowing more plant to leave. So wind blows the air, water vapor away from the leaf. Water vapor that has diffused out of the stomata is carried away. As you can see, low humidity maintained near the leaf without wind, air becomes saturated. So basically here it says when it's so low humidity maintained near the leaf without wind, air becomes saturated. That means if you have a lot of the water that came out stay right next to the plant, what's causing this? It's just causing it to be high, so it won't be allowing the water to leave, simply because there was no wind going on. Now, larger water concentration created between inside and outside of the leaf. So that means if the wind pulls the water away, then yes, the inside will be much more water concentration, rapid diffusion of water, therefore rapid transpiration. So once again, if you make the inside more high than the outside, then more water will leave the plant. And that's what the wind does. The wind takes away, right here, takes away the water. So this area becomes low compared to the inside that is high. And this way, transpiration will happen. No effect if the air brought by the wind is already saturated. So basically that means if you already have too much of too much of water, and no matter what the wind is doing, then there is no motion going on. Next, outline the adaptations of xerophytes. Now, xerophytes is one of the requirements that you must know from 9.1, such as they having reduced stomata, they have rolled leaves. If not, even they're not rolled leaves, they usually can be just a stick, right? They're very much narrow. Okay, so that means to decrease the surface area. And they usually not only they reduce the stomata, but they only open during the night. So it reduces the chances. They have very much thick cuticle, which is a wax to stop evaporation. And they have this on the upper as well as the lower epidermis. It's where you want to reduce as much as you can. Some don't even have leaves at all, so they don't usually have water loss. Also, they have very much long roots because these roots want to try to absorb as much soil as they can around the sand that doesn't have much water. So let's see here. These xerophytes are plants that live in dry conditions. So yes, I forgot to mention the obvious, right? Xerophytes are found in the desert. Reduce leaves, spines to prevent water loss, as mentioned. Roll leaves to prevent water loss. Thick waxy cuticles. Reduce stomata to prevent water loss. Deep widespread roots to obtain more water. So you can see here that I've targeted most of the things. Special tissues for storing water. This I did not target. Take in carbon dioxide at night. So basically we're just saying that we open the stomatas just at night and not during the day. So this is basically one of the kind of words that we can have. So before I go to the next one, let's repeat this just to get it strong. How many points did I get here? I did mention reducing leaves, the roll leaves, the thick wax cuticle, reduce stomata to prevent water, the deep roots going down to get more water, and basically the camp plants, which basically means take carbon dioxide at night. So that means stomatas only open at night. Now, with that, I can have now mentioned the obvious that they are basically in the desert and they have special tissues for storage water. So me, I'm just adding the extra information. So as long as you have these traits right here for the xerophytes, you have plenty of traits. And remember, you don't have to take all of them. So this might be having like 8 mark scheme points, but the question's definitely asking for 5. So we have targeted all of them. But if I was you, know all of them because this can come a lot also as a multiple choice question. So the next question here says, the rate of transpiration can be measured using a data logging pressure sensor connected to the plant cutting via plastic tube. So they have the data pressure right here, and this basically it's censoring what's going on with transpiration. In the experiment, a control setup was connected to the tube and placed in a well-lit room with a normal humidity levels. So they basically already said here that the humidity is normal. okay? And it's well lit, so that means they put a light in there. And here you have the plant. This is, you can see this is a photometer, right? Which is one of the labs you must know how to do. You have the plastic tube, and inside of there you got water. And of course, this water is actually going to move in this direction. Why? Because the leaf is going to evaporate the water, depending of course, the humidity, the temperature, whatever is your manipulation. State the specific type of plant tissue that the plastic tube is meant to model. Now, when it says here, state the specific type of plant tissue that the plastic tube is meant to model. This most likely, when it says plant tissue, we're talking about the xylem, right? Because they're trying to model how the water is moving through the xylem and out of the plant. So B, predict with reason what will happen to the pressure in this tube as transpiration occur. So what will happen to the pressure? And with reason. Well, since water is leaving, this will cause some kind of pull, in which the pressure here is going to pull it this way, causing a low pressure, and thus here having more pressure. So this side here, let me put another color. Eventually here we have a low pressure, and here having a high pressure of water will cause they go from high to low and keep the water moving that direction. And C, outline how this control setup could be modified to test the effect of either humidity or temperature on the rate of transpiration. Once more time, the question. Outline how this control setup could be modified to test the effect of either humidity or temperature. So that means I want to use this system right here. Let me clear up this. I'm going to use this whatever setup here, and I want to test or the temperature or the humidity on this. If it's temperature, I can do is, I don't know, put a lamp here, and with the lamp put a lot of heat, or I can take an AC and increase the temperature of the AC. Humidity, what I can do is put a plastic bag around the plant, and the plastic bag will eventually cause the humidity here, and I can put the plastic bag for a certain amount of time and see which one it goes. So first A, xylem, good. The second one, the pressure will decrease. Remember, because water is leaving, the pressure here will drop, but there will be pressure high here, so that's why the motion goes. Water volume decreases due to evaporation. Like I told you, since the water is leaving, it causes decrease in pressure. And then the tension of the water causes increased air volume, thus air pressure decreases. So basically, this is just saying that the water will eventually move in this direction. Now, C, alternative 1, humidity. Outline how the dependent variable is varied. That means, like I told you, put the plastic bag depending on the different hours. Cover the experimental plant with plastic bag. Outline the control of treatment is not covered or missed. So that means we can have one plant with the plastic, another plant without the plastic, and then see what happens. And the light, of course, is keeping constant. Here, temperature. Outline how the variable is varied. That means we can put in different temperatures like 10, 20, 30, 40. Outline the control thing. That means no heat lamp for the control, right? So there's one without temperature. Control other variables. This can be, does not change humidity level, so we just can keep the rest of the variables, like the light can be the normal, the humidity can be normal. So here, going back to the question, just to be clear, it says outline how this control setup could be modified. Let me erase this again. So outline how this control setup could be modified to test the effect of humidity and temperature. So depending on the question, if you see a 4 points, describe not only the humidity, but also talk about the other ones. That means talk about the independent variable, the dependent variable, as well as the control variables. Talk about all of these guys to get that 4 points. If it says just 1 point, then say how you're going to fix these two. When we mention dependent variable, talk about the 5 variations. Like, for example, if you want to do with the temperature, you talk about 0, 10, 20, 30, and 40. And 0 here, you can say that there was no temperature put, and then these are different temperatures that were put. And you can say throughout this process, the sunlight stayed the same, the humidity stayed the same. So these will be like the control. See, this is a way to explain the experiment. That's why you do IAs, so you can know examples of controls of dependent and independent variables. So moving on. Next, explain the functions of different tissues in the leaf. Once again, it says explain and the functions of different tissues in the leaf. Now, we are basically talking about the leaf itself. So when we talk about the leaf, I'm talking about this drawing right here, right? Where you have on the top, right here, you have the cuticle. And what does the cuticle do? It's a wax that prevents evaporation. Then after this, you have the upper epidermis, which is basically it's just like a skin protection of the leaf. And then after this, you have a bunch of palisade mesophyll. And these guys have a lot of what? Chloroplast. So by having a lot of chloroplast, what do? Photosynthesis. So that's basically their function. And then you have the sponges, mesophills here. Now the spongy here, what does it do? It has to do with gas exchange. It has to do with keeping the absorption of water vapor. And when we say gas exchange, we talk about CO2 and oxygen. And then you have kind of like, actually no, let me continue this with the lower epidermis, which again is just covering, protecting the skin. And in there you have some openings. These openings are the stoma, and that's where there's the exchange of gas, such as oxygen and CO2 going in and out, or the evaporation of water coming out of it. And right next to it, we have the guard cells. And what is the guard cells? Guard cells controls the evaporation. Guard cells are the ones who basically cover the stoma or open the stoma to allow oxygen and CO2 to exchange around that area. So basically we have here talk about the tissues. Let's see what we have. Function must be given to a word mark. So cuticle prevents water loss. Epidermis protect the cell, like I mentioned. Stomata for gas exchange. Palisades, layer for photosynthesis. Spongy for the layer photosynthesis. Well, we do have some parts of the spongy cells that have chloroplast, but it's mainly in the palisade. Air spaces for diffusion. So here, for the spongy, we can say air space for diffusion of these two gases. Sponges for gas exchange, as mentioned. A xylem transport water. Oh, I did not mention about the xylem, the most obvious thing. The xylem and the phloem. Here, the phloem for the photosynthesis, the sugar, and the xylem for the water. This is one of the structures I didn't draw, but it's now we get there. Stomata allow transpiration, as I mentioned. And guard cells open and close the stomata. And and one more here, we have guard cells close the stomata to reduce transpiration. So you can see here the structures that you must know for the leaf. The cuticle, the epidermis, the stomata, the palisades, the spongy, the xylem, the phloem, again, the guard cells with the stomata. So these are different functions of the leaf. It's basically knowing the leaf anatomy and what do they do. But here, since it's asking for the function, you don't have to draw, but you have to give their function. So cuticle, to prevent water loss. Epidermis, to protect. Stomata, for gas exchange. Palisades, for photosynthesis. Sponge can do photosynthesis as well as gas exchange. The gas exchange is who? Is between oxygen and CO2. Xylem, transport water. Phloem, transport the sugar that comes from photosynthesis. Stomata, allow transpiration. Guard cells open and close the stomata, and if it closes, reduce transpiration. So here it's basically explaining the whole process of the leaf. And here are the possible future questions for this topic 9.1. These questions were answered in my lecture video. Make sure to go through some of these because these ones were not mentioned yet. They could be mentioned, but make sure you know them well. And with that, you have mastered 9.1.